All right, folks, and don't go too far because we are very pleased to have a keynote for you. So if I could ask you to take your seats again. Hi. All right, folks. We are very, very blessed to have Senator Charles Perry, Chairman of the Senate Committee on Ag, Water, and Rural Affairs, with us again, second Groundwater Summit in a row, to speak to us about what he sees in the coming session. Chairman Perry, I think that you know this crowd well, but we are just very grateful that you're here, and let's welcome him to the stage this morning, or this afternoon. Thank you so much. Good to see you. How are you?
You reckon they could turn that mic on and set up stand?
Yes, absolutely. There you go.
Can you do this one?
Free range.
One of these? So I don't have to stand behind that microphone. I don't like podiums very well. I guess that's not smart in today's political climate not to have a barrier between you and the audience, but that's okay. It's good to be here. I appreciate what you guys do. I will say we had some legislation last session that created a little bit of excitement in the group. That may be an understatement in some, but what I do know and what I have seen and what I've heard, and I haven't seen the products of it, that you guys took that seriously as an organization. You're working well together to try to figure out how to address some of the things that came up through legislative session. So I try not to acknowledge effort when I see it. You guys have done a good job, from what I can tell, over the interim to work for part of some of the 1392 stuff. So thank you for that. It's important that we're paying attention a little bit on some of this stuff because what we do matters, and we need to try to get that right. So I'm going to talk a little bit broad about session, dare it down to some water initiatives or some things that I see might be useful or interesting to you, and then finish up with a couple of little anecdotes of other stuff that were going on. But generally speaking, it's not going to be a huge water session in that we're going to have a lot of bills filed, I don't think. I think it'll be pretty narrow scope on some things. So that's a good news and a bad news. Good news is we're going to get to focus in on substantive issues. Bad news is it's going to be only a few things to shoot at me for. So that's okay. Generally speaking, next session, I think what I can sense around the state and talking to Lieutenant Governor and other representatives and things, where the priorities of the session will be are going to be pretty, like I say, pretty narrow. I think you hear property tax reform. Unfortunately, you see school security taking front and center, probably equal priority on what can the state or what should the state and what shouldn't the state do. I've been designated by the Lieutenant Governor to draw up a statewide water flood plan. And in that context, it will impact some of your roles, I'm sure, that I'm not even aware of today. But we're drawing up a statewide flood plan as we speak. I've got an initial draft in my office. I've been into D.C. area. Everything that's flood is federal. Pretty much everything stops and starts at the FEMA, at the Corps, at the Interior. So a lot of things that we think we should just able to go do as a state is just not true when it comes to jurisdiction, and that FEMA drives a lot of that discussion. So a lot of moving parts on that and a lot of jurisdictional issues, but those are the big three. Healthcare will always be a challenge for the state to meet, both in Medicaid, indigent care, state healthcare system for retired teachers, all of those factors. Those are the four things that will consume our oxygen next year. We'll have a $220 billion budget. I say all these things, I've had people say, well, why don't you talk about that stuff and not just all about water? You guys need to know you're a piece of a cog in a wheel. And that as a state legislature, we've got a lot of different priorities and a lot of different things to deal with. No one is more important than the other, but finding that proper balance is the challenge that we face. And when you silo these issues, when you silo water or you silo roads or you silo without the consideration of what else is going on, you have a very poor outcome. So everybody's connected, everybody's Texan, everybody's country, and it takes a lot of that. So I would say that those are the big four that you'll see a lot of time and energy on. Bill Clinton said one time, running a government's a lot like running a cemetery. You have a lot of people underneath you, but nobody's listening. So I think what you'll see next session is a lot of people are going to start listening, because I think it is a session of substance. I think it's a session of discussion about infrastructure needs, which will include water. It's a session about State deferred maintenance on assets that are declining to a point that they need total rebuild. So Harvey, as bad as it is and was, has rose the level of discussion about, are we really utilizing state assets as best as we can? So I think it's going to be a good session from getting back to the basics. We got to remember what our why is. What are we about as a government? What are you guys about as an association? Your guys is to manage an aquifer system, an underground water system, so that is stretched to its fullest capacity for as long as it's possible, that doesn't economically harm people in the process. We're not made to pick winners and losers, but here's the next level of discussion. I've said it before as I've talked to you guys. You guys have a wealth of information. Texas Water Development Board has a lot of that, kind of a feeder system back and forth. I'm not asking you to change your mission. You got to remember your why. I've got to remember my why every day, where our purpose is. But at some level, you guys have information that's critical to water supply issues, water supply development issues, not just conservation thereof, but as 1,000 people hit this state a day, and the average use per person is 100 gallons per day for that individual, that's 100,000 gallons of need that we're creating every day just by virtue of the Texas miracle that we're not actually getting that much rainfall every day. So you are a big piece of that cog that we demand and rely on to be a resource to go to for both conservation and supply. And you need to step up to that call and do it in a way of resource-driven. I know you got your individual local district battles, and we'll continue to help shore up what that looks like. Specifically on legislation, I think you can expect to see out of my committee, you're going to have a ton of flood control, flood plan, flood water bill legislation from a lot of the people in those regions that were affected directly, and rightfully so. There's problems there, so you'll see a ton of water legislation in those regards. Specifically out of my cabinet, it's going to be pretty limited. You'll see 862 lose your pay come back. We'd reached a point where the judiciary was kind of left with the discretion. I'm having some ongoing discussions, relatively recent, that said there's two components of that we need to look at. I know the enforcement and stuff, so we'll have a discussion about that. Anybody that knows me now knows that I want to get the policy right. I think if you're honest and you look at what I've done in my committee and how I approach it, we typically don't do knee-jerk reactions, and we typically let associations and members and stakeholders really vet it out. Last session, that was 1392. We learned a lot, we've dealt with a lot, and you guys have responded well to a lot. 1392, as last setting, was not a really huge omnibus move in y'all's rules. So I think you'll see that come back in its current form. Hopefully we can build a consensus and be done with it, because I think the last session was a process of getting through it. But again, I want the policy to be right. 862, lose your pay. We're gonna have that. I think the political climate supports it, but more importantly, is it good policy and right policy? And the answer to that is yes, if you look at the private landowner and property rights scenario. So you'll see 862 resurface. In conjunction with the flood planning, and when I was in D.C., they were very encouraging and emphatic about ASR is a priority on a national level. And therefore, it should be, and they were kind of winking a nod, for you to get funding to do some of the things that you guys keep talking about doing. ASR projects will gain favor in the federal system. So I hope that you'll see a flood control report talking about flood mitigation, at the same time build in a conservation element of future supply development. We would be foolish to waste the time that we're in. You know, carpe diem, seize the day. We got an opportunity here to rebuild and do some things that we should have already done, arguably, that can help your world as far as aquifer storage and recovery in the future. So your input into that role and process is going to be critical. TCEQ is going to be a large part of that discussion. You don't want to contaminate the aquifer. So all of those factors will be in the next play in the next session. Where we're kind of at, I think, as a state, is we don't have the luxury to walk away from our responsibilities to do the core functions. Roads, bridges, education, water is not the priority it should be. I love the fact that y'all have a mission to conserve what we have, but let's be honest and serious. We can't continue to conserve more water into existence. We can only kind of extend what we have. And the water supply discussion, in my honest opinion, is one of those areas that we have not done due diligence. We have not raised it to the priority or the urgency that it should be on a state or national level. And so before y'all run out of here and say I'm advocating a national water policy, I'm not. A national water discussion, though, about building the things that we have access to create some perpetuity in water supply initiatives from around the state to this country. So it needs to be a bigger global discussion. As population continues to increase and the needs begin to grow, it's not fair to say you guys have got to figure out how to make something that has a finite capacity, infinite in resource. It's not realistic and it's not good government. So I ask for you guys to contribute to that process and help in that regard. With respect to specifics, I always want your opinion. I always want your input. And y'all are not shy about giving it to me. And that's okay. It makes a better outcome. For those that don't know me, my legislative philosophy hasn't changed. Is there already a law or rule in place that satisfies the issue of the day? And it's just a lack of enforcement. If not, is it an issue that the state should be involved in? If so, fine. If not, let the locals figure it out. So I haven't changed that philosophy. Anybody that's worked with me will know we want to try to make the policy right. So I don't have a whole lot to talk about on water because it's going to be narrow. And that's a good thing. I will say this, that the challenges we face in Texas are big when it comes to the other budgetary constraints. When it comes to some of the challenges that the school security issues, private property and private and due process are going to be interjected into that. So the issues are going to be really big. But the good thing about it is I wouldn't want to be anywhere else than Texas because we can actually fix them if we put our minds to it. So it's not a doom and gloom. It's an acknowledgement that we're here where we're at, and we need to hit these head on and be unashamedly. Your groups can help that discussion if it comes to the table with a resource mentality versus a protectionist, I guess, or something that affects us without consideration that you're harming some other side. We got to have a little broader discussion about those things. I'll leave you with a thing, and I know I'm keynoting, and we don't normally take questions, but I always make this available. I'll take it. If I don't know it, I'll ask Representative Davis what the answer is, or Senator Rodriguez, and if they don't know it, we'll get back to you. But I don't want you guys to leave here being talked at or talked to. If there's something that's on your mind, share it. Catherine Thigpen and Lauren Murray are with my staff back here. They will be glad to take notes or take back questions, and we'll try to get back to the best of our ability today. A long time between now and January as far as what's going to transpire on a lot of different levels. So I make no promises or concessions other than we're here to be a resource just as I've asked you to be. Getting it right is important. 3 rednecks went to heaven. Pearly Gates, St. Peter was standing there. He said, I'll let you in if you can tell me the answer to this question. He says, what is Easter? First redneck stood up and he said, well, that's when we meet in November. We have turkey and watch a lot of football and sleep a lot. He said, no, I'm sorry, that's not right. Second redneck got up and said, well, that's actually in December. We have a tree, we have presents, we have a big family get-together. It's a really nice time, typically do a little snow skiing. And he said, no, that ain't right. So the third guy says, well, actually, that's Easter is in the spring. It's a celebration of Jewish Passover with Christian holiday. It celebrates the birth, the death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And St. Peter was just like, yes! And then he continued on. And he said, and then they removed the stone away, and if Jesus comes out and sees his shadow, that we have 6 more weeks of... So a couple of things come to mind in that. We got to get the policy right, because being wrong can have some unintended consequences when you're talking about water specifically and how we let it be developed and how we let it be used. It's important stuff that we do on water. I will tell you, and it's not because I'm water chair. I've lived out in West Texas, and I've seen water and water shortages, and I've seen what it looks like in other countries. The number one thing that will keep Texas from doing what Texas can do, and this country for that matter, west of Colorado, is the water or lack thereof. So water is probably the most important thing that we give the least consideration to. So with that, I ask you to partner with me, partner together, and we move forward. State's going to be okay.